Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Tuesday, the 5th of August, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. With that, let's go ahead and jump into Inside the Beltway here. Robert, good morning. Let's go ahead and open up with this probe into Russiagate. I don't know, this looks like a strongly worded letter. Robert, I keep seeing all these Trump administration officials say how egregious and how illegal this Russiagate stuff was. And they've got these declassified documents now. And Hillary was in on it. And Obama was in on it. Basically, all the key players that were obviously in on it were in on it. And maybe now they have proof. I'm just one to not expect a lot of prosecution to come out of this. Am I wrong in thinking that? Also, what's the latest? Oh, hang on. I think you're still on mute somehow.
So, according to someone that is familiar with these plans, what is going on inside the DOJ, Attorney General Pam Bondi has directed the DOJ to start a criminal investigation based on those documents that were released by the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. And apparently, she is directing them to convene a grand jury in order to start this investigation. The location of that grand jury has not been announced yet. I did see some legal analysts saying that it looks like it could be Florida based on some of the people involved, some of the DOJ officials involved. That now, federal grand juries typically do recommend indictments. The federal DOJ usually doesn't convene a grand jury unless they think they're very likely to get an indictment out of it. However, there is still a chance that they do recommend against indicting some of these national security officials that have been accused of this conspiracy.
Mm-hmm. All right. One thing that's going to greatly complicate this, if it does move to a criminal trial, is all this FISA stuff. You have all this classified information. Typically when there are matters of national security, basically the judges have two options. Number one, they move to declassify some of this stuff. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it sure seems like it's going to reading a jury on to probably some of the most highly classified information of that time. Sure seems like it's going to be problematic, and maybe that's another thing that complicates this. All right, let's move on. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, so I when they came out, I read both the Mueller and the Durham reports, and there already has been at least one person who has been convicted for some of their actions around this investigation. I think it was a CIA lawyer or an FBI lawyer who had manipulated some emails, interagency emails, who ended up taking a plea deal. I think if we do see anything out of this, it won't be necessarily around anything that's not currently known or unclassified. It would be something like that, where if they could prove or get some kind of plea deal on any kind of fabrication of evidence or manipulation of evidence around the Crossfire hurricane, like the one previous conviction.
Mm-hmm. Another thing too, even if the DOJ can get a successful conviction out of this, which may be a big if, it still seems to me that people are going to see this as they want to see it. And if you're inclined to believe that Russiagate was a conspiracy, now you'll just have justification. Hey, some people, maybe some people go to prison for it. Otherwise, if you're inclined to believe that Russiagate was true and there's no hoaxes and there's no the conspiracy was on the other side, you just say, well, this is a witch hunt and it's a travesty of justice and just another reason Trump's going after his political enemies, and there's no reason to go after these people. So it seems like this is not, I don't know, it could be a win, could be a loss. All right, let's move on to this. Oh, a British man named Ahmed Mohammed was recaptured by ICE. What's the latest there, Robert?
So DHS said that they recaptured this British national, and he apparently escaped while being transferred to an LA ICE detention center. What's interesting about this is that he was de-arrested, according to DHS, by masked anti-ICE activists, and then left under their protection and escaped in a waiting vehicle with the help of some of the protesters around the facility.
Mm-hmm. So he has been recaptured, and then I guess he will be processed for deportation, or what happens next to him?
Yeah, that will be the next step. Is they'll now that they have him again, he'll go through the deportation process or removal process.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then finally, lots of stuff on this power grid. PJM came out a week or two ago and said we're running into capacity issues. This is something we're going to see a lot more of. Robert, you've been way out ahead on this. Warning of this probably 2 years ago that something like this is going to happen. It is happening now. And let's go ahead and look at Texas, and then I guess the Mid Atlantic. We're back on PJM.
Yeah, so this graph on the slide is from the Energy Information Agency's latest short-term energy outlook. And according to them, they're saying that Texas is going to see an average, an increase in power demand at an average rate of 11% over the next 2 years. And the Mid Atlantic is going to see an average increase of 4%. And this is important because this is a huge spike for Texas, especially, but also PJM, which covers those Mid Atlantic states and some of the Midwest states like Ohio. Because this is in the PJM situation, that's double what they're expecting the U.S. average power demand increase to be, which I think is like 2.2%. Texas, being an average rate of 11%, is 5 times what they're expecting from the U.S. nationwide average. And I think this has to do mainly with the data center question, because Texas is a major area where we're seeing proposed data center construction, a lot of water use and projected water use. And then I think Virginia and Pennsylvania have been 2 major states for this data center construction. So that's, I think, what is driving this huge spike in projected demand.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And then have you seen the latest from Texas? Are we ramping up electricity production capacity to meet this new demand, or are we going to also be behind the curve here?
Well, I think one of the big areas where Texas has been building for the last couple of years has been really storage capacity. From what I understand, they're also using like recycled EV batteries, putting them on the grid in order to increase storage. But that, of course, doesn't increase baseload dispatchable power. So I think one of the main problems Texas is going to run to is what every other state is running into, is the permitting process for new coal or new gas and like nuclear just takes too long to address something like a 1 to 2 year spike like this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. And it's been a mild summer here. I shudder to think how bad it would be if we had a summer like we did a couple years ago when we had like 100 straight days of 100-degree temps. Pretty bad when any part of the country experiences that, because there will be power issues. All right, thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on to the global sit rep here. And let's jump on this missile treaty here, Jared.
Absolutely. So this is coming from the Russian Foreign Ministry. They said yesterday that Russia no longer considers itself bound by the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or commonly known as INF. Now, the Russian Foreign Ministry is citing American short and intermediate range missile deployments to Europe and the Asian Pacific. That's kind of expected. The United States pulled out of the INF back in 2018 under Trump's first term, and we've seen a couple different deployments here and there. It was only a matter of time. I do expect to see a bit of tit for tat deployments just going forward. So don't panic. Just understand what the threat is.
Hey, Jared, on that topic, I think it was over the weekend we saw this little spat between Medvedev and Trump. The what is he, the deputy secretary or whatever, the Russian National Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, yep, and Trump. And Trump ended up saying, well, we're just going to move 2 nuclear submarines into the region just in case you want to get a little froggy. And I saw a lot of NatSec people, national security people, say, oh, president can't say that. President can't say we're deploying nuclear submarines. What do you make of all that stuff?
I'm going to throw some opinions out here. So Medvedev, sure. There's Medvedev and I believe her name is Zakharova. Both of them just come across as Russian bulldogs to me. They are constantly going after it, and they just say the most inflammatory stuff in order to draw a reaction. And saw Trump's reaction. Okay, fine, we'll deploy nukes. That if you want to have a nuclear discussion, we can have a nuclear discussion, but that means I'm going to lose my saber. That means I'm going to put the nukes where they got to go, because I'm not going to make a threat I can't back up. And then on Monday morning, I went over to I went over to Russian media, like, all right, what did they say about the deployment? Because presumably the nuclear subs are there. Like, you have to treat that realistically. And Medvedev did not respond, but Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin aide, did, saying, okay, hey, we want responsible. We want to talk about this in unequal footing. We don't want to get too much gamesmanship here. Let's back off. So it's just posturing, quite frankly. Like, that's all I really expect out of that until a nuke really flies, and that we're going to see indicators ahead of that, including plenty of warnings like, hey, we are going to nuke you. Please stop doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to actually exchange nukes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly low likelihood there. But all right, well, thanks for your opinion. Interesting, Jared, and it's good to hear that it's maybe just some saber rattling. All right, let's go ahead and move over to Australia to buy. Going to buy some Japanese frigates.
Yes. So this is coming right from Australia's deputy prime minister, who also functions as their defense minister. He said that they're going to buy the Japanese Mogami frigates, and that's to replace Australia's aging Anzac class. Now, Australia plans to have the first frigate enter service in 2030, so there will be a bit of lag time here, as you expect. You got to build them. You got to make them in Australia as well for the time being. Now, Richard Marles, the defense minister, also added a very interesting quote. There is no country in the world with whom we have a greater strategic alignment, speaking on Japan. Thought that was very interesting, considering that we're actually treaty allies with Australia. But the big thing here that's important is bilateral agreements between American allies, such as Australia and Japan. They increase interoperability and thus strengthen the alliance at no cost to the American public. This is an entirely, ally deal that's out there that will make them more interoperable, achieve the goals that we intend to actually set out. Works for us, doesn't cost us a penny. Great.
Mm-hmm. And then this also, Jared, ties back into enabling these countries like Japan or Australia to potentially operate independently without a lot of U.S. involvement.
Yep.
At least initially. Okay.
Yep.
In like a wartime situation with China.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Hey, one thing we've seen from India is last year they gave over the past couple of years, they've given several boats to the Navy of Vietnam for their own maritime security. And now India is elevating this partnership with the Philippines. Is this a play? It almost looked like India was, of course, they're trying to do this to build goodwill, but India is also kind of an aspirational naval power, conducting exercises farther and farther abroad, including, I guess, with Vietnam. So is this something where we're going to see this relationship blossom here between India and the Philippines? And could we see India start to give some boats to the Philippines to make them more of a challenge for China?
Oh, yeah. That's my expectation, is that first off, the Philippines, they need to worry about themselves primarily. And that means whoever's going to sell to them, buy from them. Plain and simple. Just to get to the heart of the story, the Philippines and India announced that they would elevate their relationship to a strategic partnership. And they signed plenty of deals all along: defense cooperation, space cooperation, cybersecurity, amongst numerous other things, including exchanging extradition treaties. Now, the Philippines reports that this is actually the same level of relationship that it has with the United States. So they're elevating India basically as high as they possibly can. Now, the Philippines also just received their first BrahMos missiles. So those come right from India using Indian and Russian tech, which, okay, fantastic. They're great anti-ship missiles. I do expect a lot more development here, and potentially some ships as well. The Indians do want to have a much larger footprint as far as actually weapons exports, particularly ships, go.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then let's move on here to Panama. This has been a kind of a big deal simmering in the background. Apparently, did we place sanctions on Panama, or what's going on?
So, the United States placed sanctions on numerous ships. The Maritime Authority of Panama, AMP, they announced yesterday that they're going to be canceling the registration of all of those ships that the United States sanctioned because they were flagged under Panama. Additionally, they're taking corresponding measures against a company that was based in Panama and an economic group that was based in Panama, basically saying you will not operate here at all because of the United States sanctions. The AMP also reiterated its commitment to enforcing international sanctions lists recognized by Panama, i.e. the United States sanctions. So what that tells me is that Panama is actually taking legal action on our behalf. And Panama is not the most registered nation in the world for foreign flags, because you can register your ship wherever. But I noticed over in the Gulf, like Panama was the number one over there. You see a ship, any merchant ship, 6 times out of 10, it's a Panama flag ship. We just started assuming at that point, okay, unless we see otherwise, we're just going to mark it as Panama and, carry on.
Mm-hmm. So, Jared, these ships that were sanctioned by the United States that were flagged in Panama, they were sanctioned because they were transporting Russian oil or Chinese oil, or do you know exactly why they were sanctioned?
So Panama didn't say which set of sanctions this was. For all the merchant fleet, it's typically been for transporting Iranian oil over to China.
Oh, when I say Chinese oil, that's what I meant. Oil going to China, because this seems like very much a gray zone warfare tactic, which is continually try to pinch down on China's oil supply, which could include sanctioning ships that are running that oil from Iran to China. Okay. All right. Thanks. And then let's move on to Brazil. This is like As the World Turns, just a new plot twist every day between the Brazilians and the United States. But what kind of critical minerals does Brazil have?
So I saw this right before we started publishing, so I'm going to have to go and actually develop that list.
That's fine.
But at the very least, the main thing to take away here is that the Brazilian foreign minister is going to offer critical minerals development, even if they don't have a massive abundance of them. The fact that he's going to offer to the United States what he called cooperation agreements on critical minerals, rare earth elements, and more efficient batteries. So, hey, you come, dig them out, help us produce batteries, we'll sell them to you. That way we can have a better trade relationship. That's really the important part, not necessarily what minerals are there and are not. I will, however, look into the exact details of what do they have, because it may be that they actually have something that I'm just not aware of right now that's much more important. Mm-hmm. He's also, Haddad, the finance minister, is also scheduled to meet with Treasury Secretary Besant later this week. So this proposal should actually come out very soon.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. And with that, let's go ahead. Listen, let me just say something about these protests. We track these protests every day. The major protest groups, Indivisible, 5051, there's a handful of them. And then we also track far left training, far left meetings, the Antifa type stuff. If you ever see a dot in your area, some of you are going to see a dot every day, and you're not already a Forward Observer subscriber, head over to forwardobserver.com, sign up. Try us out. Free 7-day trial. You can go to our protest and riot tracker. You can zoom in on this map and see where these protest events are, or see where these direct action demonstrations, or see where these trainings are taking place. And then you can make a choice to avoid that area. Maybe make a choice to go check it out, depending on how interested you are. Forwardobserver.com. That's one of the things we track. And listen, we started doing this back in 2016. But we really gained a lot of notoriety doing this in 2020 because we were tracking the riots every night and producing a roll-up every morning. Hey, here's what happened. Here's the cities involved. This is what we think we're seeing. These are the groups involved, et cetera, et cetera. We are going to get back to probably something like 2020. Not necessarily BLM riots, but there is going to be something like a 2020 happen again. And with that, let's go ahead and talk about why that is the case. And it has to do with this group called Indivisible, which is, I think, probably the country's largest protest organizing group. This was started back in 2016 during the first Trump administration. They started this as a direct response to the Trump administration to build a vehicle for what we're probably going to see in 2028. There are many reasons why I said last year, I mean, literally a year ago, why 2025 would not be a repeat of 2020. And the biggest, I mean, really, the number one reason is because the left and the activist left, militant, radical, revolutionary left, whatever you want to call them, they're still in a rebuilding phase. They are still trying to rebuild these networks like synapses in the brain. They're still trying to build local groups, networked with state and regional groups, networked back into the national movement. And what we're pretty clearly still in the organizing phase. So with that as context, remember 2020 didn't just happen, just didn't spring up over a couple of weeks. 2020 was the culmination of 4 or 5 years worth of agitation, networking, organization, and training. We don't have 4 to 5 years of networking and agitation and organizing and training. We got about 6 or so months of it. And so this is going to take years to build up again. In all likelihood, probably years. And I'll state that case here right now. So Indivisible published a series of training videos, and they call themselves freedom trainers. But in these training videos, they did confirm my expectations of broadly 3 phases of their strategic non-cooperation campaign. And that's what they call it, strategic non-cooperation. You should familiarize yourself with that term if you don't already know. Non-cooperation is a tactic that was developed by Gene Sharp, and other people I'm sure had some involvement there. But Gene Sharp is often cited as the godfather of color revolutions and other anti-authoritarian movements. Now, I'm going to say a lot of things about authoritarian regimes. I don't think the Trump administration is an authoritarian regime, certainly no more than, say, Biden was. But when I use that term, I just use that using their frame of reference so you can understand where they're coming from. And this theory of non-cooperation goes that autocratic regimes require the participation of its citizens to keep a country functioning. And when a mass of those citizens cease cooperation with the regime, society ceases to function, and the pillars of that autocratic regime are weakened, and that eventually causes the collapse of the regime. And you can see these pillars of support here on the page. So the strategy includes building a mass defiance movement. Let's break that down. Mass defiance movement. Mass means a lot of people, the mass of the people. Defiance means not just voting, but active forms of opposition against a regime. Active non-cooperation, civil disobedience, direct action demonstrations, something more than just protesting on the sidelines, although that is also important to the movement. So that would be a mass defiance movement, and we'll break this down a little bit more. But this is all aimed at weakening the 6 pillars of a society that supports a regime. And those are business, labor, faith, education, civil service, and military or police. This is a screenshot of one of the slides in those training videos. So under this strategy, you would have business owners and CEOs and other people openly opposing an autocratic regime. They could do things like encourage their employees to do the same, put up signs or posters, use their profits to fund protest or fund non-cooperation or direct action demonstrations against a regime. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar here is labor. So this is going to be stuff like worker strikes and slowdowns. Another reason why 2028 is probably going to be the year when this pops off is we're seeing this huge push by these labor unions over the past several years to negotiate their contract expiration dates. So this is they have these contracts between these labor unions and the employers or the corporation, and those contracts have to be renewed every so often. Well, Sean Fain, the director of United Auto Workers, has encouraged all these trade unions or labor unions to go and renegotiate their contracts for renewal on May 1st, 2028. What is that? International Workers' Day or May Day. And so that is just another reason when you have all these labor unions, they're going to push for a general strike in 2028. I don't know if they're going to make it or not, but they're going to push like hell to have a general strike, like a nationwide general strike. I'm not telling you it's going to be successful. I'm telling you they're going to try it. It is 100% plain as day. That is what they're going for. That's why it is another reason why 2028 is probably going to be just as disruptive as 2020. So you got 3 years to get your stuff together, basically. All right, so that's the second pillar. There's labor. The third is faith. So encourage faith leaders to, or have faith leaders encourage their congregations to oppose the government, to include that in their messages, to hold meetings, hold education, training, whatever. Number 4 is education. So have teachers take these opportunities to educate in their classrooms, use anti-authoritarian curriculum in the classrooms. Number 5 is civil service. So have government employees work from the inside to grind down a regime. So that could be things like losing paperwork or kind of work slowdowns, not doing what you're supposed to, leaking certain information is given as an example. And finally, the 6th pillar here is military and police. So they are going to be encouraged to not enforce a regime's dictates or defect altogether. And so this is the kind of the mass defiance strategy here. And when you have enough people engaging in non-cooperation or mass defiance, a regime no longer has the internal support required to survive. And I just want to share with you just briefly this quote. And this quote is directly here from Gene Sharp. It's a pretty good summation of this whole theory. And Gene Sharp says, let's see here. All right, here's what he says, quote, "By themselves, rulers cannot collect taxes, enforce repressive laws and regulations, keep trains running on time, prepare national budgets, direct traffic, manage ports, print money, repair roads, keep markets supplied with food, make steel, build rockets, train the police and army, issue postage stamps, or even milk a cow. People provide these services." And he continues, "If people would stop providing these skills, the ruler could not rule." And I think that's a pretty fair summation of this whole strategy, which is weakening a country or weakening the pillars that support a government from the inside. One of the things that, more broadly, even last October, before Trump was even elected, I told you exactly what the strategy would be. Undermine the legitimacy, the authority, and the capacity of the Trump administration. Weakening the legitimacy by characterizing Trump as an illegitimate president. I think that's a really high bar because of how Trump won. So the next thing you have to do is start saying, well, Trump is doing illegitimate things, which is exactly a part of their strategic messaging. You reduce the authority by getting people to not follow these laws. So immigration, non-cooperation with immigration enforcement, not following some of the dictate of the executive order, some of the things that Trump wants to be done. You sap the authority. And when a president or an administration or some autocratic regime, when the citizens no longer follow those laws, that regime loses authority. And then finally, the capacity. A government, a president, whoever, you've got to have the manpower, you got to have the resources and the funding and the things. You need things and you need people to enforce those laws. And if this movement can undermine the capacity along with undermining authority, then you're naturally going to delegitimize a government. And at the point where you have an illegitimate government, the next logical conclusion is, well, it has to be replaced with a legitimate government or a legitimate president. And that's exactly what they're going for. So with that, let's talk about what this phased strategy actually is. So Indivisible 5051, which is the 50 states, 50 protests one day. That's one of the main kind of protest organizers. And then there are other national protest organizations as well. They often cite what they call the 3.5% rule. And I've talked about this before, but just to refresh your memory, the 3.5% rule says that a regime will eventually lose power when just 3.5% of a country engages in non-cooperation. And they take that from this study. There's 35 cases between the years 1991 and 2021. And researchers found that regardless of the size, if a country had a civil resistance movement, they could defeat autocratic regimes about half the time, about 51.7% of the time. So just above 500 batting average there. But they would have far more success when those movements reached the gold standard of 3.5% of a population. So that is the gold standard. That's what they're shooting for. In today's America, that would be about 12 million Americans or 12 million residents. So far, the largest turnout that they have had for a National Day of Action is about 3 million. I've heard some of them claim that they hit 5 million. I don't believe that, but 3 million, I do think they hit that. So 3 out of 12, just do some math here. Last week, I mentioned also that this strategy, this strategic non-cooperation strategy, was chosen for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's relatively low risk compared to armed conflict. I don't know why. Many people have talked about, the left is going to rise up and there's going to be these armed leftists. And listen, I know that's history, but that's not what these people are doing. I know that's the reality in a lot of places, but that is not, at least so far, that's not today's left. So we're talking about predominantly nonviolent tactics. You look at an insurgency. The average length of an insurgency is 10 years. Nobody on the left wants to do this for 10 years, especially considering the high casualty toll. And also, there's no guarantee of success. But these color revolutions have far higher likelihood of success. And remember, color revolutions, once they're actually launched, once you actually get to the execution part, they last weeks to months. We're not talking about multi-year high death toll conflicts. The left does not want that whatsoever. And I know there are armed leftists. Believe me, I know there are. But that is not what they want. That is not a war they're going to win. So I don't know why so many people just keep thinking about, there's going to be this mass armed revolt and there's going to be like an 1861 style civil war with these people or something. That's nuts. They do not want to fight an armed conflict over this. They don't have the cards, as we all know. At any rate, strategic non-cooperation, civil disobedience, far lower risk than something armed. That means that it's going to have mass appeal. A leftist armed revolution does not have a lot of mass appeal on the left, let me tell you. Because, you watch these videos, and I've talked about this before. I see all these videos, these leftists say, the only way to stop fascism, you got to go out and kill the fascists, kill all the fascists. And it's like this 20-something blonde-haired girl who's never seen a gun in her entire life. It is always other people who are going to do the violence when these people talk about violence. They don't have the people to do it. So that does not have a lot of mass appeal on the left. What does have more mass appeal, it's going to get a lot more mainstream involvement, which is what they want, because mass is the key feature here. That 12 million Americans, roughly. What is going to have much more mass appeal is something that is predominantly nonviolent, which is not to say there will be no violence. There obviously will be, and there has been, there will continue to be. One other thing about this is there is a runway to escalation. There's an escalation ladder here. One thing we have seen from the left is they will try something and they will explain their demands. And if their demands aren't met, they will escalate and they will restate their demands. And if their demands are not met, they will try to escalate again. And so there is runway for escalation in the strategy because you start with a mass protest movement and then you move to a mass defiance movement or a mass resistance movement. And then if that doesn't work, you move to potentially a mass revolutionary movement. This is far less risky than any strategy of armed political violence. Again, that's not to say that there will be no armed political violence. That is just not going to be a main effort of their strategy. That's not a conflict that they're going to win. not an armed conflict, not in this country. So they use nonviolent action. One reason is because it's far harder to combat. If someone's shooting at you, you just shoot back. If someone doesn't go to work, or if someone, because they're striking, what are you going to do? Force them to go to work at gunpoint? If someone's slowing down on the job and they're not doing, yeah, maybe they get fired, but it's very difficult to directly combat that. We're talking about asymmetric use of power here. Everyone understands a gunfight. Everyone understands that kind of power. This kind of power is far harder to combat. So the mass appeal potential here, this is really key. It has mass appeal. It is going to get the largest number of people involved. The mass appeal potential of nonviolent strategic non-cooperation is exponentially higher than any form of armed political violence, which means that more citizens can engage. And that is the strongest feature of this strategic non-cooperation, a mass movement that cannot be directly confronted. How do you fight a protest? How do you fight civil disobedience other than going in and trying to arrest so many people? And then you end up getting in a fight over that, and then it's on video, and then we get back into this 2020 thing. It's like, oh, look, these cops are firing tear gas and pepper spray at these innocent, peaceful protesters. This is what dictators do. And that radicalizes other people, especially in the middle. This is their strategy, or this is the theory at least. And then that brings more people off the sidelines. There's a reason why for actually many years now, why I've said the future does not belong to the people, or the future does not belong to the man with the most guns. The future of this country belongs to the people who can belongs to the man who can bring the most people to the fight. Let me restate that so we can get a clip out of this. The future of this country does not belong to the man with the most guns. It belongs to the man who can bring the most amount of people to the fight. There's a reason why these movements are talking about building political, social, and economic power. There's a reason why they're talking about using that power to undermine the Trump administrations, or the right, or the conservatives, or Republicans, or the MAGA movements, political, social, and economic power. This is where the battlefield is. There's so many people, I see this all the time on social media. Oh, I bought this brand new AR-15 and it's got a twist rate on this barrel, and we got these kind of bullets, and oh, here's my kit that I ordered that's, what, and it's just insane amounts of money and effort going into something that in all likelihood will never be used. When these people fail to engage on the political, social, and economic level, they cede that battlefield. They cede that battle space to the left, because that is exactly where the battle is. I digress. Let's go ahead and talk about these levels here. So Indivisible's latest training videos confirmed my previous expectations that we are seeing a phased strategy play out. And as these freedom, quote unquote, freedom trainers outline, the strategy starts with a protest movement, which has been sustained. So that is the base of the movement. That is the foundation of this pyramid. They cannot move forward without a sustained mass protest movement, which they have achieved. Now having at least 2 national days of protest meet probably the 3 million mark, 3 million participants. So the next phase is to develop individual organizers and the cadres required to start training up citizens or residents at the individual and small group level so they can engage in non-cooperation in a local area, such as a town or maybe a county. The next phase of that is when you have a base of individual and small group action, you move to larger groups engaging in collective non-cooperation across an area like a state or a region. And then finally, you build that into a mass non-cooperation movement at the national level. So this roughly mirrors the Popular Revolution pyramid that I published earlier this year. We'll get back to this in this other slide in just a sec. And this starts with symbolic resistance at the bottom. So these are the toothless protests that we've seen for roughly 6 months now, but they have been sustained. And then you move up the one layer of escalation. You move to selective resistance. So this is the strategic use of civil disobedience. I think they are trying to break into that level of escalation. And then followed by mass resistance at the national level. So you get these big national days and weeks of action. And then you ultimately end in an attempted popular revolution, which if they do kick this thing off, it could happen prematurely, but it's probably going to be 2028. If we kind of stay on this trajectory, we're probably looking at 2028. We're probably not looking at any time sooner. Although the one caveat is if Trump does something so egregious, or the administration does something so egregious, or something that is perceived as so egregious, then I think we could probably see this kick off sooner. One thing that Robert and I are particularly paying attention to is this redistricting process that's ongoing in Texas, because this has the high potential to carry some political instability, and it's something that we're on the front edge of this. We'll continue to watch it. So to reiterate previous assessments here, I think we're probably in about the third inning of a 9-inning baseball game, which is to say we're still predominantly in the organizing phase. These networks, the human infrastructure, the communications, the funding, all that stuff is still being organized. It is still in the organizing phase. This is the first phase. Although we have seen some sporadic and sometimes even lethal political violence, I think those are outliers. I don't think that actually reflects the current stage. That's definitely not the main effort. The main effort is still training and education, and those are just classic early stage activities. So that's where we are. That's been our bread and butter here at Forward Observer since 2016, when I started Forward Observer as an intelligence company to track what these far left groups were doing back in 2016. And then we did that through 17 all the way through 2020 and 2021 through the worst of it. We are going to repeat that. So if you want to stay ahead of the curve, join us. Come join our mission. Get access to all the intelligence behind the paywall. Understand what's really going on, stuff that you're not going to see on Twitter. You're not going to see in the mainstream media. And let me just say this also. Not only will we keep you ahead of the curve on these big things by talking about them sometimes years in advance, but definitely weeks and months in advance. You're not going to see hair on fire, crazy predictions, end of the world predictions. No one here makes these unfounded conclusions, and we're extremely tight with what we say and how we say it, and we always have evidence to back up our conclusions. So forwardobserver.com. Do join us. All right, and with that, speaking of redistricting, Robert, welcome back. Let's go ahead and jump into this. So Texas, I've already said as the world turned, Texas is the days of our lives. How about that? All right, so we saw these Democrats leave over the weekend to avoid a quorum, and that's where we are, where we were yesterday. Where are we today?
So the Texas House voted yesterday to issue civil arrest warrants for 56 of those Texas Democrats who are still at large. I believe 6 did return for that special House session yesterday. Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General, said he said, quote, "I'm prepared to do everything in my power to hold these Democrats accountable," which means when they do return, if they don't go back to this special session, I think that means the Texas Department of Public Safety has the authority to detain them in order to return them to the Capitol due to these civil arrest warrants. But I think in the larger strategic picture, I'm seeing both Democrats and Republicans digging in for, ahead of what is, I think, likely to become effectively a gerrymandering war. So there was someone close to President Trump, apparently, speaking on background, said that the White House's political strategy is maximum warfare everywhere all the time. And I've also seen announcements come out of major Democratic organizations like the national level Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee has called on all Democrat-controlled states to start redistricting efforts. And House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said that Democrats are going to respond from coast to coast and all points in between to this mid-decade redistricting effort in Texas. And so another important aspect of this is that the Supreme Court is set to hear oral arguments again in a lawsuit in that I think we covered last year, this new Southern Democrat strategy, where they were using the Voting Rights Act Section 2 to create majority minority districts in red states in order to get effectively a guaranteed blue seat in the House. And the Supreme Court's going to hear oral arguments on that again after already doing that earlier this year. And from what I could find, a lot of legal analysts who have experience in front of the Supreme Court are saying that this looks like a sign that they are going to strike down potentially the Voting Rights Section 2, which I think would actually make this fight even more tense, because that would be removing one of the tools that Democrats have used to effectively do their own mid-decade redistricting over the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm. I remember you and I talking about that Supreme Court or these cases where federal courts have ruled that these states have to have a what do you call it? Majority
minority district.
Yeah, district. Okay. So this was in Alabama. This was in Louisiana, maybe a couple other states where you have these federal courts ruled. Yes, you have to give black people their own district in Alabama, Louisiana, wherever. And I don't know the constitutionality of that, but that's what they said. So if the Supreme Court does come in and they do rule against this, then we're obviously going to see redistricting efforts in additional number of states. Robert, do you think we're back on BLM watch? BLM, Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black Lives, they've been sitting on the sidelines. They said they're kind of like meh about Kamala Harris. They're kind of meh about Biden. Trump got elected. They say, look, we're not going to jump into this. Maybe at a certain level, that's because support for BLM has dropped as a national entity. Black Lives Matter, the organization, not Black Lives Matter, kind of the popular movement here. Support for that has dropped substantially. I think they're effectively a non-entity. They spent a ton of money, like millions of dollars, I think, doing this rebrand. They changed their website. They got some new PR, try to spiff up their image. And I looked at that at the time and I said, well, obviously they're trying to set the conditions maybe to regrow into a politically relevant movement. If we do see these majority minority districts disappear in states like Alabama, Louisiana, wherever, are we going to see BLM enter back into the chat here?
I think it's probable, because that would be another avenue that Democrats, especially at the state level, could use to put pressure on their own states for getting these mid-decade maps going, because that seems very clearly an avenue that would be advantageous for the Democrat states. Because one of the problems that a lot of these blue states are facing is that in their own state laws, they've implemented these independent redistricting committees. And in reality, many of them are not very nonpartisan. Like I think in New York's case, after the 2020 census, they put forward a map. Their independent commission put forward a map that would have taken Republicans down to 2 seats out of 26 in the state, down from like 11. So they're in actual effect, they don't appear to be nonpartisan, but they are an obstacle for getting it done quickly. So in the case of like New York, they have to pass a law amending their constitution. I think in California, they also are pushing now. I saw Governor Gavin Newsom is now pushing for a referendum in next year's election to get rid of their independent commission so that they can get this in before 2028. And I think using or BLM being reactivated would be another pressure point and another political messaging point for Democrat states to actually get this started and actually get it going ahead of 2028, where they might have problems with some of them getting the votes to overturn these independent commissions in the next year.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, I'm seeing some comments here too about people just being frustrated with this whole gerrymandering thing. And listen, I tend to agree with that. I don't think partisan gerrymandering is good for anyone in this country. Well, it's good for some political parties in this country. It's not ideal, but Robert, just realistically, we have so many of these blue districts padded. Just more or less, they only exist because of the 2020 census included illegals. And that seems like it's just manipulation of the electorate, manipulation of these voting districts, which probably shouldn't have happened. And I think if you're the Trump administration, you're President Trump, some of his advisors, obviously Republicans in Texas, and you say, well, what we're doing is a response. We wouldn't have to do this if we didn't count illegals in this country. I don't know. That seems to be the justification. I don't know how strong a justification you think that is.
Well, I think that is still a major point for Democrats why they're trying to get this done before 2028, because they have been saying for the last couple of months now, after Trump proposed changing the census question for apportionment, that they're warning they're going to lose potentially dozens of seats, which would effectively lock them out permanently, at least from the House.
So if the Trump administration is successful in getting the citizenship question, the citizenship question added to the 2030 census, Democrats are expected to lose many seats. That what
correct?
Okay.
And so I think they see that as a deadline. But I actually tried to find some data on how the seats were apportioned versus, blue state versus red state. And what I could find after 2020 is that actually states with Republican governors were apportioned like approximately 230 House seats, almost 30 more than the Democrat seats. So I think if we see this escalate to an extreme partisan gerrymandering that I'm seeing some Democrat commentators call for, where you're talking, 100% blue seats versus 100% red seats, I think it's also a potential accelerant of this political conflict, because you could see Democrats still come out, even with, I think maybe one state has changed control from Republican to Democrat in that time, but I think Republicans would still have a majority of the seats if we saw a total partisan gerrymandering, which is, I think, another potential accelerant. And a lot of this, I think, is centered around that 2030 census and whether Trump can succeed in changing the way apportionment works with that citizenship question.
Mm-hmm. This is one of those things, you just kind of extrapolate this out, especially in a historical context. And, I think it's easy for me to look at this and say, this definitely seems like an accelerator of political violence, of a lot more political instability in the future. And I don't know Martin Armstrong, and I don't really even follow his work, but some of you do. So I see your comments in the chat and other places, but Martin Armstrong is an economist, and I don't know, he's got this computer model. I don't know how accurate it is, but isn't one of the things he says is that 2028 is going to be the last election in the United States. And again, I throw that out there just as an interesting data point. I haven't done my due diligence on it. I guess I probably should before I mention it. But you look at extreme gerrymandering, what that's going to do to the House, and then you look at how the 2028 election is sizing up, and it's like, man, maybe this guy's right, or he could be right at least. So this is another reason why we exist. So, all right, Robert, thanks for that, and let's go ahead and move on. Last item of the day, I saw this where was the Department of Transportation, was it Sean Duffy, said we're going to put a nuclear reactor on the moon. Let's maybe build some nuclear reactors in the United States first. Yeah. Seems kind of important, but also, why is the Department of Transportation? I guess space is under DOT.
Actually, but we'll get into it.
Okay.
Let's cover the facts first. Sean Duffy is expected to announce a plan later this week to put a nuclear reactor on the moon in conjunction with NASA. Now, one NASA official, speaking anonymously, said that this is, quoting, about winning the second space race. Now, several media outlets reported that they got a hold of the directive, so they're publishing what they say is, coming right from it, that the plan will call for a 100 kilowatt reactor, which is relatively small, actually, to be launched by 2030, key date, a replacement to the International Space Station, and orders NASA to designate a lead for this entire project. Now, part of the reason that 2030 is a key date, we've covered the SMRs, small modular reactors, coming online in America, Australia, Canada. They're all coming on. They're I think, close to a dozen, maybe 10, coming online well before 2030. So, yes, there will be some here, probably going to get a couple of years worth of practical experience with them before putting them on the moon. Now, this plan, we've covered the space race for a couple of years here. I think this plan is both feasible and necessary. And the reason why I say it's necessary is the first nation to establish a space fleet. And that's effectively what this is geared toward. This is not about just a lunar base. It's not about getting a reactor on the moon. This is about establishing space dominance. The first nation to establish space dominance controls space. You get effectively a global navy near instantly. That is what this space race is actually about. On to the feasibility. There are a couple of different technologies that we've covered extensively that are all going into this. First off, SMRs, got it. Modular spacecraft, we have not covered that, but I did watch an interview with a company that is actually doing that. They're right now, as rockets are, they're purpose built for whatever mission they are set to do, and then they're not used again, not normally. The modular spacecraft idea is, you will have these, pre-built rockets that you can send up, reuse, we're good to go. That creates availability for much more rapid development and deployment, and potentially redeployment, given what we've seen from SpaceX. Additionally, you need space traffic laws. And that traffic laws is not just, right lane, left lane. It's who's going where, when you can go, who's got the right of way, who's defending your ability to actually even conduct commerce. All of that we covered here on Forward Observer back in 2023 when the Department of Defense and Department of Transportation announced that they were splitting those duties. So I believe it's the Transportation and Commerce will jointly develop the actual, commerce and movement, but DoD through the Space Force will be assigned actually defending these merchant lanes, very similar to what you see in the Navy. Now, all of this is obviously grandiose, extremely grandiose. It does fit toward a basically fitting, if you want to achieve the Make America Great Again mission with the Fortress North America mission, you need to establish a space navy. Quite frankly, there's no other way to put it. It really, yeah. This project is going to be costly, no doubt, but there is an enormous potential upside. I don't think you can properly estimate how many jobs this could potentially create, just because if you open up a new commerce sector, there are parts of that people just won't know need to exist that will suddenly have, we need to develop these. We need new jobs. We need whole new positions. On top of that, the resources that can be extracted from space commerce, like actually establishing a lunar base, radically change how things are actually done down here on Earth. It could change rare earth elements into something much more common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that is probably the most feasible form of energy on the moon, considering you probably couldn't do solar.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know, not unless there's dinosaurs or something on the moon. I say that, of course, tongue in cheek, but there's no fossil fuel, there's no coal, no oil, gas, I guess, on the moon. That's the only way you're going to power anything on the moon is nuclear, correct?
Pretty much. You can do solar. I mean, you can see here from the shot when America went to the moon, the sun is there. It's just a matter of, how long it's there, how viable is your battery even? Is your battery, sufficient for maintaining its life in the cold of space? Because that's something that not a lot of people consider when it comes to batteries, is extreme heat and extreme cold will just wreck battery life. Mm-hmm. But small modular reactors, as far as actually conducting propulsion and establishing power on a permanent or semi-permanent lunar base, all of that is done very easily by reactors.
Mm-hmm. All right. One step closer to the Jetsons. Thanks for that, Jared. And with that, running long today. Let's grab maybe like the top 2 or 3 questions and
okay.
And
they're all going to come from our site then. I'll save the ones for YouTube. So
yeah, and let me just say this too. If you're a Forward Observer member and you're watching this wherever, we're going to take questions from the Forward Observer site directly from members first, and then if we run out of questions there, we'll move to YouTube. It's another reason to join Forward Observer, by the way, especially if you like to ask questions. Go ahead, Jared.
All right. So coming from Dan in Texas, there was an incident over in Panola County, Missouri. A homemade explosive device was neutralized. Dan says there's a lot of similar incidents in the news lately. Is there a trend in IED manufacturing in the USA? Would this be a leading indicator of violent political unrest?
Mm-hmm. Sure, certainly. I have also noticed that we've seen multiple busts from FBI or other law enforcement where they found some variation of either ID components or I think maybe in a couple cases actual constructed IDs. I don't know the frequency. There's a thing called frequency bias, which is maybe this stuff's been in the news or maybe this stuff has been happening for years. And then you just hear a couple news items about it and you say, oh, well, this is a huge spike in activity, obviously, because it's making the news. There must be tons of this stuff. And really, you're talking about same baseline level activity. You just see it more frequently in the news. So I think you got to be careful about making too much of that. But I would just say, yes, it does seem to me that I am seeing more. And again, I don't know if it's just because it hasn't been in the news under the Biden administration. Now it suddenly is in the news. I don't know. But, you know, a couple of weeks ago, probably at the beginning of June, a month ago, I didn't say it on the show, but I did say it on Twitter. I said, you know, at this rate with these shootings and stuff, I said, you know, at this rate, I'd be surprised if we don't see a bombing by the end of the summer, maybe by the end of the month. Obviously, it didn't happen by the end of July, I don't think. However, it is very concerning to me to see these IED busts, I guess you would say. I would just also say this. There are a handful, probably 3 or 4, actually really good bomb-making guides circulating on these far-left blogs. And every time I see one, I throw it to my buddy from Afghanistan, who's one of our IED guys, or EOD guys, a bomb tech, explosive ordnance disposal. And I would send it to him, and he would just look at it and be like, yeah, this is real. Like, you could actually, this is a legit guide. So something to keep in mind. All right, next question. Oh, okay. Apparently, Amanda says there's a 30% increase in IEDs discovered this year compared to a 2023 ATF annual report. Hey, Robert, can you just get on the ATF website or do a Google search, maybe grab some of those reports for the past few years, and let's actually see if there's something to it. Thanks for that. Or not necessarily right now. All right, Jared, what is the next question?
All right. Regarding India, we've recently seen our VP state that India is not the friend it's been portrayed as, even going as far as to point out the abuse of the H-1B program. Do you see this as indicative of the relations with India going forward?
I've said this 2 or 3 years ago. India is India first. Narendra Modi, the whole the Hindu supremacist stuff, they're all India first. And I think they are willing to cooperate with the United States where it benefits India and willing to be uncooperative with the United States where it also benefits India. And I think that's where they are. So I think more than anything, they're probably a friend of convenience. I know Trump and Modi have gotten along very well. And every time Modi comes to the United States, he always goes to Houston. Oh, yeah. Before we cut out yesterday, there's 2 cities. Sugar Land is like 1/3. Sugar Land, Texas, which is an affluent suburb of Houston. It's like 30% Indian. There's another, was it Plano? Somewhere up near Dallas, Fort Worth area. There was another town where Indians were the largest plurality of that town. There are massive amounts of them here. Point being, that's beneficial for India and just having the India diaspora. Jared, doesn't Jai Shankar, the external minister there in India, he always talks about the Indian diaspora. He goes on these big global tours and he meets with Indians in all these countries. And this is not politically correct to say, but my God, it just seems like they're like colonizing places. I talk to people you look at Ireland, also South Africa, lots of other countries just have massive, massive volumes. Someone said that some guy in Ireland said this the other day on social media. I don't know if it's true, but it was on the internet. So it has to be. He was talking about English and Scottish people basically colonizing Ireland in the Ulster plantation or whatever they called it, basically replacing the population of Ireland. And he said it was something like 40,000 Scots and Englishmen repopulated or came to Ireland. There's about 50,000 Indians in Ireland today, according to him. And let's just say both of those numbers are true. You know, a lot of people in the United States they call themselves descendants of Ulster Scots. And that's exactly what they were. They're of Scottish extraction, but they were from Ireland. And he was talking about how huge of an impact that made on the genetic makeup of Ireland, having so many Scotch and Englishmen, or Scots and Englishmen in Ireland, and just what a big impact that made on Ireland. And now you've got even more Indians in Ireland, just an incalculable impact to such a, just a tiny island. Not so. At any rate, I think all that stuff that obviously benefits India. I think, I look at this a lot like the Chinese. You have this massive Chinese diaspora, and they're Americans. They're whatever. But many of them, most of them, I don't know how many, undoubtedly have some kind of loyalty to China. Actually, there was that, Robert, what was that lady? She's a Democrat, just a Latina lady. She's Guatemalan. She was it Mexico? She was at some conference or something, and she said, I'm an American, but I'm Guatemalan first. I'm Guatemalan before I'm an American. That's almost exactly what she said.
Yeah, I forget her name, but she is a representative in Congress. In
Congress, yes. And then you've got that Thanadar, cartoon character, another guy. He's from Illinois or something like that. So, so at any rate, going back to this India thing, India's India first. I think having this global diaspora is very good for them. They have no reason to stop it whatsoever. I think they like H-1B stuff. I think they like having these massive amounts of Indians live all over the world. It gives them a lot more diplomatic power. Gives them, at some point, maybe leverage as well. It's a national security concern. I would consider it that. I'm obviously not in charge. Next question. We'll do one more.
All right. Regarding Brazil and Bolsonaro, I saw yesterday that the Brazilian Supreme Court placed him on house arrest. Do you see this issue escalating? What about our trade with Brazil, and are there products we should put on our get now list?
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. We get coffee beans and something else from Brazil. Listen, this whole Bolsonaro thing, I know it's a huge point of contention with President Trump and the administration. I don't know. I don't follow that closely to give you like a really good expectation of the future. It's way outside my lane. However, Jared, do you have any observations?
I normally wouldn't put a lot of stock into it, but the State Department did sanction a whole bunch of people for what they're doing to Bolsonaro, amongst plenty of other things. So I'm not totally discounting it. That said, it's kind of rare it's very rare for any particular individual to become the focus point of international relations like that. Normally you subside over much deeper things like tariffs.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks for that. And Robert says he has an update on this ID question.
So the ATF, they release supposed to release every year, and what they call their explosive incidents report. They have not released one for 2024, but as of the 2023 report, I didn't see. They don't say that there was a 30% increase in IEDs. What they do point out is there's about a 26% increase in bomb threats from 2022 to 2023. The actual explosive device recovered, which they point out are mostly IEDs, is about a 7% increase. But the actual bombings have decreased in that time frame. So I didn't see the 30% statistic in their reports. But that of course they haven't released last year's report yet. So,
okay. Well, thanks for checking up on that. And all right, TBA. Jared, I'm just going to get to a couple of these questions about color revolutions since I talked about them. Hey guys, I saw y'all talk about left-wing tactics and how the right wing has its own playbook. What are the right-wing tactics, especially the early warning indicators of increased temperature? Listen, people comment on the YouTube channel from time to time. Mike, why don't you ever talk about right-wing terrorism? Why don't you ever talk about the fascist Nazis? Because there's a million NGOs that track all that stuff. They don't do it very well, but there's so many sources. You can't. What's the saying? You can't fling a cat without hitting an anti-hate researcher or whatever. So that I don't cover it because very few people comparatively cover the left in the detail that's required. And so that's what I look at predominantly. In terms of early warning indicators of right-wing violence, I don't want to get in this whole charade about listen, I think you'd be hard pressed to find I know because I've done tons of research on this myself. You will be hard pressed to find a classically fascist movement arise in a country without a communist revolutionary movement on the other side. There's a reason why it's called reactionary politics. They're reacting to something. Almost always, they're reacting to the threat of communist revolution. So, if you want to know what the right wing is doing or whatever, go somewhere else. You probably won't find it here. And I don't mean to be short with you. Just a lot of people ask me that, and my answer is always the same. There's tons of people already doing work on that. Not very well, but they're doing it. Are color revolutions more designed for national governments rather than federal governments? Jonathan, that is an interesting question. And off the top of my head, I don't know. Because, yes, most of the time, these color revolutions happen where there is a national government, not a federal system like we have now. I have to go back and look at, I have this master list of color revolutions, and I'll just say popular revolutions in general, because they're two different things, but there's a lot of overlap. I'd have to go back and see where those happened actually in a federal system like we have now. But I actually do think it matters because you have lots of very powerful state governments, and you also have enumerated powers. So some things a federal government's not supposed to do that a national government can. And I do think it would impact a popular revolution, especially kind of this red state, blue state thing. All right. Are Democrats / leftists? Well, first of all, let me say this. Those are two separate things. Clark, you probably know that. But there's the left in general, which is not a monolith. But I make there's a huge distinction between like liberals or progressives and far left, even though they are broadly both called the left. Are they always following this mass defiance playbook? I would say no, not always. And listen, this is Indivisible's thing. They've built a coalition, but there are lots of different organizations in this coalition. Organizations that could or could not go along with this plan. We've seen a lot of national days of protests that where Indivisible did not really latch on to, is not organized by the Indivisible folks. Like that John Lewis, whatever, the Good Trouble Day, whatever it was, Day of Good Trouble, I don't know. Kind of a blip, mostly a blip on the radar. But, that's a completely separate organization from Indivisible. And so anytime you have this large coalition, you're just going to have people, you're going to have players that want to do their own thing. So they don't like X, Y, or Z. So, they don't do whatever. So the short answer is no, they're not always following the mass defiance playbook, although generally I think that is where the bulk of them are pushing towards. And it's going to take probably years to build this movement. This is not something that can just spring up over a single summer. Even if it could, it's probably not appropriate to seek kind of a culminating or decisive event this early on. Still going to come in 2028. It could happen before. Do you think people are tired of it, or is more a strategy when Republicans are in charge? Well, it's definitely the strategy of Republicans in charge. Basically, anyone to the right of Mitt Romney is a fascist. That's what they say. So I think one reason why, I do think people are fatigued. I think Americans are fatigued by a lot of things since 2020. And I do think left-wing political disruption is one of those things. I mean, you just look at the approval ratings of the Democrat Party, and it's just, I think, probably historic lows, far worse than Republicans. I don't think that means a whole lot for the midterms. However, I do think that is a limiting factor. Is there was so much energy and there was such a large sense of urgency and so much agitation that burned out in 2020. I do think I do think a good many of them are still kind of fatigued from that. And I've also heard that from on Antifa blog, I've read it on Antifa blogs, on like interviews and podcasts where you have these hardcore Antifa militants saying very directly, we're kind of demoralized. 2020 wasn't the revolution that we were pushing for. Or, we had this opportunity in 2020 and we failed. Or they're tired and burned out. I mean, you even have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying a few months ago, we don't want to do this again. We don't want to go through another 4 years of this. So I do think there's a sense of fatigue all around. The biggest thing for me is just looking at the economic and financial space. Most of the, every Friday, this is a members only report, but every Friday I publish an economic early warning report. And I tell you exactly what these banks are telling their clients, tell you what hedge funds are talking about, the risks that they publish, their concerns, their take on the economy. None of them are calling for a recession anymore, not at least through the midterms. So they're all talking about growth slowing down. So at least according to now, and they could be 100% wrong. But the recession is that's like the big red flag. If unemployment starts to go up and if inflation does continue to go up and you have economic hardship hit the country, I think that is going to encourage a great many people to want change. And, obviously the high unemployment rate and the lockdowns, people couldn't go to school, people weren't going to work, all that stuff was a huge accelerant in 2020. It would not have happened if we were at full employment. If COVID didn't happen, George Floyd probably would have been like was that place in Missouri, right outside St. Louis? It probably would have been like a Michael Brown incident, not a national kind of insurrection. So one reason why I don't expect another reason why I did not expect another 2020 this year, Somerville 2.0, is because I said last year, if we don't have a recession and lots of people, millions of people aren't out of work where they would rather be working, we're not going to see another summer of love. All right, a couple of last questions and we'll bounce. How would a group like Indivisible influence faith leaders as the left has been very anti-religious? Well, listen, there's been massive influence by culturally left-wing, socially left-wing individuals. And we see this in like Unitarian churches is one really great example. All these interfaith alliances is another really good example. I don't know. I follow, I'm not Southern Baptist, but I see people who are just constantly talking. Robert, do you have something to say on this? Constantly talking about how the Southern Baptist convention or whatever they are, SBC, was woke, going woke, and there's this like big infighting here between what's going on there.
Yeah, there has been a significant politically liberal infiltration of especially some of these Baptist and other Protestant denominations for a long time now. But there's also two other factors. There's also two other kind of aspects of this. One is that there's the Unitarian Universalist Church, which is explicitly political and very heavily Democrat. That's I don't remember if people remember this during the Obama administration, but there was this kind of weird video of Obama going to church in DC and everybody was just kind of like sitting there. There was no service and everybody that's the Unitarian Universalist Church. And there's even one literally down the street from me here in what is basically the Trump country of Florida. And that I think gives the perception that they have a lot more influence with faith leaders because they're able to put these guys out there. A famous one was that Tennessee state rep that got expelled from their Congress. He's in the unit. He's a preacher in the Unitarian Universalist Church. Another aspect is that there's I think a very heavy agitation propaganda operation on social media. There are a lot of left-leaning and progressive people who pretend to be faith leaders and create videos. Obviously, I think meant to influence politics on social media. So it's very, I think, deliberate operation. So they have, I think, a pretty good influence over faith leaders in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would also say that's a tradition, probably going back to decades, just with all the the reverends during the civil rights movement.
Going back to the late 19th century, the big movement in late 19th century, early 20th century left-wing politics was the Christian socialist movement, like Francis Bellamy. So there's a very strong historical interrelation between left-wing politics and the church in the United States, or some churches at least.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks for that. A couple other questions here. You and others have said a sovereign wealth crisis in 8 to 10 years. Yeah, listen, that's from one of those, that 10 years is from Ray Dalio. He said there's something like an 80% chance of a big debt crisis in the United States at some point within the next 10 years. That's what he says. I look at that and I just baseline expectation. That is my baseline expectation. How would that affect the future political situation? Yeah, listen, the economy, the state of the economy, the state of the financial space, I'd probably say is a primary determinant of social instability in this country. So that's something that, you obviously should be, I'm keeping my eye on, because yes, if we do have some kind of a chronic or acute debt crisis, one of the things Ray Dalio says in his book, so Dalio is a hedge fund founder, like a legendary hedge fund manager. Bridgewater Associates was for a long time, I think it still is, the world's largest, and also for a long time the world's most successful. So this guy's like a multi-billionaire based off making bets with other people's money. He's extremely good at it. So back in 2016, when he was at Davos and he was sitting in on this CNBC interview that I happened to be watching, never heard of the guy before, and he said, yeah, actually, I am concerned about a civil war in the United States breaking down broadly between capitalists and socialists. My ears perked up and I said, oh, probably better follow this guy. So that's been his thing for almost 10 years now, maybe longer. And so, yes, anytime we are eventually going to have a debt crisis in this country. And it may be something that we muddle through, or it may be acute. It may be something like we wake up and the banks are closed. I don't know. It's too early to say. I think the Fed and the Treasury have a lot of tools. I think they could probably basically Japan themselves a way out of this. It's called financial repression. I wrote a report on it last week. But basically, if we do have a debt crisis which induces economic hardship, which it obviously will, because you have a Treasury and Fed they're just going to have to print their way out. Then yes, that is going to push the issue, I think, of capitalism versus socialism. Late stage capitalism has failed. It's like Mark said, it's reached its conclusion, and now there's going to be maybe a fight over socialism. So yeah, I think that's something that is also in the back of my mind. All right, last question. What are your thoughts on what to do if you live in one of the rebel states? Well, I would say this. Clark, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by rebel states, but if you live in a red area in a blue state, actually, if you live anywhere, the primary fight is on the political, social, and economic plane. That is always the primary battle space of low-intensity conflicts. So my best advice to you on what to do is organize, organize, organize. Network, network, network. Everything flows from your network. Your ability to navigate the future is the primary determinant of your ability to navigate the future is the depth of your network. If your network is narrow and shallow, you're going to suffer constant limitations on manpower, on information, intelligence. If it comes to this, logistics, you're going to have massive problems. But if your network is wide and deep, then you're going to have a lot more people to draw from. Remember, in the Army, we said every soldier is a sensor. Every soldier has an obligation to pass up information. And your neighborhood is the exact same way. Every neighbor you have, every member of your community is also a sensor, and they have access to information. They're hearing and seeing things. And if they're hearing and seeing things that have intelligence value, and they're not reporting that back to you, then you are failing as an intel guy or an intel gal. And you may not think of yourself as an intel guy or intel gal, but effectively you have to be. So that's my advice. Network, build your network. Find the social organizations that already exist, the political organizations, the economic organizations. If it can't be you going to these meetings and rubbing elbows and introducing yourself to people and building relationships and making friends and getting business cards and whatever, reaching out, going to play golf, going to lunch, inviting them to shoot, go fishing with them, whatever. If you're not a people person, find a people person and go have them do people person things, which includes building a network at the local level. Because when something does pop off, being able to reach out to someone and say, hey, this is nuts. Like, what's going on in your area? What are you seeing right now? That kind of relationship is going to do more for you than just about anything physical in most cases. All right, we've gone way long today. Everyone, thanks so much for the support. If you like what we do here, if you like our mission, you like our perspective, and you want to support it, head over to forwardobserver.com, start a free 7-day trial. Come join us, get access to the watch floor, get access to our special intelligence reports that do not go out to the public on YouTube. Member-only reports, you get my weekly economic early warning. Plus, based on what I've seen from Indivisible, I have several, probably 3 or 4 new intelligence reports that I need to write up specifically on the timeline and the strategy and the tactics of a popular revolution or a color revolution, which I do think is coming in 2028. You can get access to all that. Understand where we are in this phase, in these phases, and also what you can do about it. I'm also going to have to start writing things about how to defeat a color revolution. So with that, forwardobserver.com, we appreciate your support. And with that, everyone, we will be back in your box tomorrow morning back on this show, starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.